I'm Judy. Welcome to my studio here in Rocky Mountain National Park. I was a high school art teacher for over 30 years in Ipawa, and in the last few years I've been able to concentrate on needle felting, so I've become a fiber artist. Having had lots of opportunity to play with lots of kinds of media, I've decided that needle felting works really well for me because I like creating animals, and most specifically dogs. So I do commissions and I make people's dogs for them, Christmas ornaments and gifts and that kind of thing. So needle felting is the art of taking a tiny barbed needle and entangling the fibers in unspun wool. The needle has barbs, the wool has scales, so stabbing at the wool repeatedly binds the fibers together so you can create different shapes. You only need a few basic supplies for needle felting, but they can be a little bit tricky to find. And I spent a fair bit of money on the wrong stuff when I started, so I'd like to take a moment to tell you a little bit about it. You need unspun wool, but a lot of times what you buy is this. You can see, I think you can see the long, skinny fibers. This is called top, or it's sometimes referred to as sliver. And oftentimes, if you buy a kit on Amazon, you'll be getting top, and it might very well be merino. So the breed of the sheep is really important when you're buying things for needle felting. Merino is not awesome for a lot of the things that you do. Later on, if you start doing animals with long hair, then you'll be using this kind of stuff. But most of the time, what you're looking for to felt more easily is carded wool. And it looks a bit more like a cotton ball. It's all tangled up and it's done on a machine, and this will make your life a whole lot easier. There are some breeds of wool, if you get really particular, some breeds of wool that are easier than others, but the main thing is you don't want merino. It's very slippery. So you want some wool, you need a couple of needles, a coarse one and a medium one. My favorites are the 36 star and the 38 twisted, and I use the number 38 almost all the time. There are finer needles too that you can use toward the end of a sculpture if you don't want holes, but really these two are what you need. And then you need some kind of a surface so that you're not holding the item in your hand. You want to protect your fingers and you want to protect your dining room table. So you can buy foam, it's very dense, but there are other things you can use if you don't want to be ordering online. This white foam is packing for stereo equipment. You can also use things like a soft kitchen foam or a car wash sponge or a piece of upholstery foam. But the safest thing if you're going to do a lot is to purchase foam intended for felting on, because it's non-toxic. I think it will be a lot safer for you. For a little bit of playing around though, it won't matter that much, but protect your surface. Those are the things that you really, really need. Let's get started. So one of the easiest things to show people, first of all, in needle felting is something that's flat. A very easy way to make a little ornament is to use a cookie cutter. Now I can use a cookie cutter like this, but it has an awful lot of detail, so it's not ideal. I did play around with some red and orange and yellow and make a little leaf, but I'd rather show you one that's a little bit more straightforward. So I'll set that guy aside. I'm using carded wool, not wool top. They're very different. And lots of times when people buy, say, a kit off Amazon, they're buying wool top, which is a lot harder to work with. The needle felting needles come in all different gauges, and like wire, a big number means a small needle. And in this particular brand, they color code them. So this is my larger needle. It's a 36 star. So I've just stuffed the carded wool into the cookie cutter, and basically I'm going to stab it. I'm going to go around the outline. Needle felting's not fast. So if you're looking for a really quick product, this might be frustrating for you. But if you're looking for something that's kind of relaxing, you might enjoy it. I would suggest that listening to a great podcast is the way to go and not watching Netflix, because needles are very sharp and they hurt. And I still catch a finger every now and again. But truthfully, this is a really good place to start because Even little kids can do this. It's possible to pin a cookie cutter down or tape it down to a surface and just, of course, keep an eye on younger kids. But I think most parents have a pretty good idea of what their kids can handle. So I'm just going all over with the bigger needle, and it's binding up the fibers of the wool, and it's basically turning it into a sheet of felt. So every now and again, you do have to pick it up and flip it over because it's going to get attached to the foam that's underneath. I'm using a piece of felting foam, but any kind of really dense foam can work. This white foam, I believe, was packing for a piece of stereo equipment. Even a big soft kitchen sponge or car wash sponge will work, or a piece of upholstery foam. If you're going to be doing a lot of felting, I would say it's worth buying a proper felting foam because it's not releasing toxins. It's fairly firm. It will protect your fingers because you're not holding the piece up, and it will protect the surface that you're working on. So you pick up what you're making, and it gets a wee bit mangled in the early stages. Flip the cookie cutter over, put it back in, and give it another go. And if you can feel a thin area in your fingers, or if you hold it up to the light and the light is shining through, that's a place just to add another little patch. And I can see I've got a little bare spot in the thumb. So this would make a good Christmas ornament, or you could make, there we go, you could attach a number of them and make a bunting, so decoration with a whole bunch of little mittens. I'll show you some decorating possibilities in a moment. Now I would take probably 5 or 10 minutes to really get this stabbed down, and when you're working on your own, you'll be able to see where the wool gets condensed, where it gets really packed down and entangled. So things that are still puffy, like the center of this mitten, I know I need to go over it more. So I'm going to leave that one there and show you one that's a little further along. Now I've done all of this with the larger gauge needle. In this particular brand, they've colored it red, but different brands do different color coding. If you get a needle that isn't color coded, it's a really good idea to use a little dab of paint or nail polish so that you don't lose track, because they would all look the same. So I'm going to take that little mitten off and just show you the other one I was working on. So it's easy to imagine. Dig into the bottom of your craft supplies. There's lots of things you could do to decorate that, but does it have to be Christmas? Maybe that would be better with the red one. And you can use lots of things to put a little loop to hang that with. I've got some darning wool here, embroidery floss, ribbon, lots of things you could do to decorate that. I like this little one. So I wouldn't stick to Christmas things necessarily. This would be kind of cool if you had the patience for it, to do lots of fall colors. You could hang them, decorate, but that's just one possibility. As I say, I do a lot of animals, so I want to show you some other things that you could do. So I'm going to use some white here for a while. I have a little collection of shapes that are helpful for putting together to make little animals. I buy a lot of white core wool. It's less expensive. It binds up really, really fast. It can have little bits of VM or vegetable matter. It's just dried bits of grass. And if it bothers you, you take it out. But often this stuff is inside a sculpture, so you don't see it anyway. So I want you to think about all the different things you could make just with some balls of wool. You can make things like this little snowman. You can put the shapes together to make things like this little rabbit. So this guy's almost entirely white, but this fellow, not really much different in the way that it's made, but it just has some tan and a bit of pink for the nose. If you don't have all the colors, use a permanent marker to do some of that detail. But making the shapes is just rolling the wool tightly and binding it with the needle. So to start this shape, I'm going to try to get my fingers out of the way and use my larger gauge needle. And I'm kind of rolling kind of like a tube, but because I want to make a ball, once I get the pieces to hold together, I'm just going to fold the outside in. So instead of making a long skinny tube, I'm forming a ball. So the needle condenses the wool as well as tangling it up. I'll show you a bit more about that later when you start to want to make specific shapes for a little animal that you might want to make. So I'm just rolling it up, stabbing the outside edges and a little bit through the center so I don't have a hollow piece. And I'm trying to keep my fingers out of the way. So eventually this will all get entangled and it will start to feel a little bit more firm. Certainly some people felt very, very loosely, and it will probably hold together. But if you start trying to attach pieces, they want to unravel a bit more easily. So it's better to have it not hard as a rock, but quite firm so it will hold together. Now I could roll all of this up, but leaving a little bit of this loose tail is actually a bit helpful, because this is easier to attach to another ball if I'm making an animal shape, rather than trying to combine some really firm balls of wool. So I'll show you what I mean. I can take that and add it to another ball of wool to make an animal shape, which is how this penguin would have been made. It's just two balls together. I mean, you can see the penguin had a bigger piece for the body and it was covered with gray afterwards. But just holding the balls in the position that you want and then stabbing those bit of loose fibers will help to connect them. So I'm going from the top to the bottom, then I'm going to flip it around and go from the bottom piece to the top. So it's pushing the wool through and tangling it up. If you're trying to connect a couple of pieces of wool and they're not wanting to connect, then it's helpful just to take a little extra scrap on the outside, attach it top and bottom, and that'll hold it where you want it. So I was thinking about simple shapes that I could show you. And when I teach a class, an in-person class, I generally have kits made up and participants get to choose from 2 or 3 different animals. But I thought for the sake of this class and not knowing what materials people might have handy, it would be better just to sort of show how you make them and people could decide what they wanted to make. So when I look at this shape, I can see that it's still fuzzy, kind of loose around there. So I can keep stabbing that in if I want it to be firmed up further. Or if I look at it and I want, say, the top of the head to be more narrow, that's where I would put my attention, because that will, stabbing it up there will make it thinner. Or what if I had a shape that was going to be a baby penguin to go with the bigger one? So I wanted to find between the head and the body. I'm going to say that's where I want the body. So I can just go around it a few times, and that will squeeze that yarn together and define the difference between where the head is and where the body is. That would be the same if you were making the snout of an animal. If this whole thing was the head of an animal and I wanted this to be the skinnier snout, I would do the same thing. I would keep on stabbing this to make the shape that I wanted, to define the shape. And you figure it out pretty quickly. When you're working with a needle, you can see how that will kind of choke it in and become the neck of the penguin. So you can then take another color and do a thin coat on top of this. Now I started something earlier that I wanted to show you. I want to show you how to make this into a panda. So I have a little ball that I have stabbed and stabbed with a smaller ball on the top. It's a bit difficult to see. That's going to be his snout. I'm going to use the ball that I was making into 2 sections to be the body of a panda. I'll stab from one to the other to get them to attach, but I may do a bit of more of that on my own rather than take all of your time to do it now. So now I want little tubes of black. This tube was just made by rolling the wool up. Rolling it up and stabbing it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until I had the shape that I wanted. And I'm going to cut that to make it into 2 little arms for the panda. Very fat arms at the moment. So I can thin that down. Once again, just stabbing around the wrist to condense it, to make it tighter. And that will make the wrist a little smaller. And I'm going to flatten out the paw by stabbing in the middle of the mitten, if you will, the palm of his hand. So I would attach the 2 little arms around the back of the panda, and I probably would add a bit of white wool to help hold it in place. All right, so the white wool works as the glue on the back of the panda. So he would have 2 little fat arms. I'm just going to pin them in place so you can see where I'm going with this. And then I would make 2 little tubes for his legs and then some little patches for his eyes. So I'm going to take a little wad of black wool and put it in place for the patches on his eyes. You need to be careful when you're pulling wool into a shape that you don't bend your needle. If your needle bends, like this guy, you can still use it. If you try to fix it by straightening it, you're probably going to snap the needle. But you just have to be careful. You have to be careful to go straight in and pull the needle straight out. If you stab it in and pull it out in a different direction, that's how needles can be bent. So I'm pulling all those little strays in around the outside of his eye to make the shape that I want. As I say, it's not fast, but it can be very effective. The first time I saw a needle felted piece, I thought it was a very tiny stuffed dog. And at the time, I was making patterns for stuffed dogs, and I couldn't imagine how something could be sewn that tiny. And it was my looking into that, what was that particular dog made out of, that I discovered needle felting. So there's the patches for his eyes. I started the ears, and they are just little tiny balls of black that they're flat. They're more like cookies that I would attach where I need them. And then take some time to really make sure they're going to stay. Right now, I'm just kind of tacking them in place. You can see how that will develop and the ears will be more firmly attached. And a little piece of white underneath his head would make that stable. It will get there. It's just a matter of time. Now, the one other thing I want to show you on this little guy, then I think I will finish him later on and show you a picture, is how you would make the nose. Because a nose is such a tiny thing, it can seem really, really tricky. But if I take some fibers, I can stab them into place, the top of his little snout, and then twirl that around so the needle can catch it. It's like a little cyclone. But I don't believe there's such a thing as cheating. So if somebody wanted to sew a little black bead on, or even use a black permanent marker to do some detail on your sculpture, I don't think that's a bad thing. Whatever works for you. Sometimes people do a sculpture entirely out of wool, but you can make noses out of polymer clay. You can buy glass eyes. It's entirely up to what you want to do. This is just a little, just a little sewing pin, and that can be used for eyes, especially black on black. You just cut the end off with some wire snips. And see if you can see his little eyeballs. So you can see how you do the same thing for the legs. But what if you don't have those colors? You might be limited in the colors that you've bought, but who says a bear has to be black and white, a panda bear? So you can do them in any color that you want. This bear has just felt for eyes, tiny little circles, and some detail in the ears and the tummy, the pink. But this bear has little glass eyes that I bought online, and they have a nice bit of a shine to them. But it's entirely what you have in your toolkit and what kind of detail you want to have. So I would like to show you a couple of other examples, and then I'll finish this little panda on my own, and I'll make sure you get to see a picture at the end. Most any animal that you look at, you can simplify into shapes. So this little snowshoe hare, as you can see, the body is just an oval. And I've added a little bit of extra for the snout and a couple of flattened tubes for the ears and flattened tubes for the feet. So it's really just a matter of looking at an animal and identifying the shapes that you'd like to create. This little beaver is really just an oval with a flattened tail. And I did a little cheat. I just cut his teeth out of felt. And sometimes it's the decorating and little fancy things you add that really make them fun. And sometimes collecting those things can be almost as much fun as the felting, like the little decorations on the raccoon. And the tail is just a tube, the same way that you would do the arm on the panda bear. It's just a tube that was in gray with little stripes of black added around it, triangles for the ears. Now, I've shown you a little bit about how a needle can entangle fibers and how you can add shapes to make the limbs of little animals, sometimes adding a bit of extra wool to help secure things into place. But that leaves things pretty open. Later on, those same ideas can be put together into things that are a lot more complex. Some of the dogs that I make are sort of teddy bear-like with moving arms and legs. And that's just done by sewing thread through, just something that I learned on YouTube. And then my fun collecting little charms for their colors. And then my gift to myself this Christmas was taking some time to make a donkey. I hadn't made a donkey before. So in terms of animals, there's sort of no limit to what you can make. If you have any questions, get in touch with me. I'll make sure the information is in the video for you, and I'll help you if I can. I'll help you decide where you want to make some purchases and how you'd like to learn a little bit more about needle felting and creating your own little beasts. Maybe you want to make a sculpture of your own dog. There's no limit to the things that you can do to keep yourself busy. Thank you very much.
Check the description for more information on the project featured in today's video, such as the artist, the required materials, or how you can get in contact with us at Wazegaming Community Arts. Thanks for watching!